Episode 78. With Blue Brook Guild hot on their heels, Herb Garden suddenly appeared ahead. Tyrannical Ambition was now caught in a pincer, trapped between two forces.
Elementalist!
Yi Shu shouted. The Elementalist hastily lobbed a fireball over. Another OT, no question about it. The Goblin Merchant bounded toward the Elementalist, hiding behind the tree on the right.
It was deliberate after all.
Blue River and the others were now completely certain.
Are they trying to break out of the pincer from the east?
Blue River led his team on a diagonal path to the east, aiming to seize the initiative.
If you run into anyone from Tyrannical Ambition, don't hold back.
Absolutely not.
The group voiced their agreement in unison and veered off onto the eastern path. Everyone kept their eyes peeled on the trees around them, hoping to snag a player from Tyrannical Ambition for a quick warm-up. All they found along the way were ordinary goblin mobs. Not a single player from Tyrannical Ambition was in sight. Occasionally, a Tyrannical Ambition player would show their face, but they were even farther away than the Goblin Merchant. Blue Brook Guild changed course, and the Herb Garden players blocking the way ahead weren't about to be left behind. They raced toward the eastern route, as if competing with Blue Brook. Seeing both guilds suddenly change course, Shijo froze for a moment.
Could this be a feint? Take some people and circle around to the west.
Shijo quickly selected several players. Blue Brook Pavilion split into two groups. One angled east to intercept, the other angled west to prepare a blockade. Vakaria's Herb Hall immediately followed suit, splitting off a group of players to intercept from the western flank. To an outside observer, it would look like the two guilds were working together. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. These two guilds would have loved nothing more than for the other to make 1,000 mistakes. The Goblin Merchant charging toward the Elementalist was suddenly struck by a knockback attack from behind a tree, sending it skidding backward. Then, a gunshot rang out from behind, and the Goblin Merchant hesitated, turning around. It was a classic feint. The players from Blue Brook Guild and Herb Garden thought the same thing as they watched the scene unfold. And sure enough, the Goblin Merchant charged straight ahead, right at Lord Grimm. No one expected Lord Grimm to be the one to OT the aggro again, and yet the guy was still stubbornly running north. Herb Garden had just started to split their forces east and west, but they could still merge back together in time to block him. If he kept running like this, wouldn't he just be charging straight into a wall?
What's he trying to pull?
Players who like to think things through were pondering Lord Grimm's strategy. He'd definitely change his route, right? For Herb Garden, the question was more serious. They were the ones who had to intercept him. East, west, or would he just come straight to them? In the end, Shay Qianzi had no choice but to split his forces 3 ways. He had to defend against every possible direction. There was no other option. The opponent could just OT whenever they wanted, making the Goblin Merchant go wherever they pleased. So, they had to cover all 3 spots. But which one would it be? Everyone watched the goblins' movements with that question burning in their minds, but they saw no change. They simply watched as Lord Grimm led the Goblin Merchant straight toward the frontal interception line of Herb Garden. A dozen or so players from Herb Garden were there, and they immediately fanned out into a semicircle to surround them. The ranged attackers, the gunners, had already drawn their weapons and opened fire. Mages began casting their spells. Lord Grimm suddenly leaped into the air. The gunners hurriedly adjusted their crosshairs, only to see him spin 180 degrees mid-air, presenting his backside to them. Backside or not, the gunners weren't picky. Their cursors swiftly locked onto the target. Gunfire rang out. The gunners were impressed. Who had aimed that fast? That was some serious skill. And then they saw Lord Grimm whoosh across the sky.
Damn, it's his aerial gun.
The gunners cried out in alarm. The greater the recoil of a gun during aerial fire, the faster the flight. Lord Grimm's move was at least on the level of a rifle. The gunners raised their weapons and fired. Bang, bang, bang. But all their shots went wide. The target was moving far too fast to track. In the blink of an eye, Lord Grimm's backside was already above their heads. Then they saw Lord Grimm turn in midair. A flash of cold steel, he had drawn his sword.
Silver light falling blade, get clear.
The Blade Master player's warning was correct. A streak of silver light slashed down from midair, the skill Silver Light Falling Blade. The dozen or so Herb Hall players were no amateurs either. They all leaped back in unison as the silver light struck the ground. It sent out a ring of shimmering shockwaves. But all 10 plus of them had already leapt clear of the blast radius.
Go!
Someone roared. In the instant the light wave dissipated, over a dozen people charged forward again. Lord Grim flicked his myriad manifestations umbrella. The canopy flipped back, but it didn't maintain its spear form. Instead, at the 1/3 point from the top, the umbrella ribs suddenly bent, the upper 2/3 curving down to take the shape of a scythe. At the same moment, the umbrella's handle thrust outward as if a sharp sword were being drawn. But it stopped after extending only 2/3 of its length, ultimately just elongating the grip by a section. All these transformations were completed in an instant, leaving the encircling players seeing nothing but a blur before their eyes. The weapon in Lord Grim's hand had changed shape, looking rather odd, but its general form. With a sweeping swing of his arm, the myriad manifestations umbrella extended and traced a perfect 360-degree circle on the ground. The moment its starting and ending points connected, the drawn circle flashed with a sudden burst of blue light.
Shit! It's a Rising Heaven array!
Some players finally cried out. The crowd that had closed in scattered again, but this time they were too slow. The glowing blue circle suddenly expanded, both inward and out. A pale blue ring erupted from the ground, catching over a dozen players squarely within its radius. They couldn't dodge in time, and were sent hurtling into the air by the azure light. That was the Exorcist's skill, Rising Heaven Array. It deals magic damage to all players within its range, and launches them into the air. By the time the dozen or so players had finished their float and dropped like dumplings, Lord Grim had already shot past their blockade. Some tried to attack Lord Grim even while launched, but landing a hit mid-air requires adjusting your aim, tracking both your own and the enemy's constant movement. It's not a simple maneuver, and not everyone can pull it off. In the end, all their attacks were just going through the motions, posing no threat whatsoever. Most of them managed to pull off a quick recover upon landing, showcasing the solid fundamentals of the Herb Hall players. But just as they were getting to their feet, they all saw a grenade right in the middle of their circle. With a deafening blast, over a dozen of them were sent tumbling again. Through the billowing smoke, the goblin merchant, backpack slung over his shoulder, sauntered right through their midst. Everyone was instantly reduced to tears. The goblin merchant's aggro wasn't on them. That thunderbolt wasn't aimed at them. But Lord Grim had clearly baited the merchant into throwing it their way. Why is this goblin merchant being so obliging? Couldn't you have just thrown a brick? Why did you have to throw a wide area fragmentation grenade?